As evening settled over Rome, the great household of the Valerii slowly grew quiet. The echoes of celebration faded into distant murmurs, and torchlight flickered against stone walls that had witnessed generations of marriages like this one. 19-year-old Valeria Quintina stood beneath her saffron-colored veil, breathing carefully, aware that each passing moment carried her closer to a threshold she had been taught to fear, yet never taught to understand. Until that morning, Valeria had lived under her father's authority. Her life had been narrow but predictable, shaped by rules she understood and protections she relied upon. By nightfall, that life would be gone. Marriage did not simply change her status. It erased her former identity. At sunset, she would be transferred legally, socially, and physically into the authority of a man more than twice her age. This was not unusual. It was Roman marriage as it had existed for centuries. Roman weddings are well documented. Archaeology preserves the veils, the rings, the marriage beds. Ancient texts describe the rituals, the processions, the feasts. Art depicts smiling brides and dignified grooms. Yet there is one part of Roman marriage that history tends to soften or avoid entirely. The wedding night. The moment when ceremony gave way to reality. The moment Roman women quietly dreaded most. This story is about that night, and about everything that followed it. Earlier that day, Valeria's mother adjusted her veil with practiced hands. Her voice was gentle, but her words carried no illusions. Roman mothers did not promise happiness to their daughters. They promised endurance. The advice passed from woman to woman was never romantic. Remain calm. Do not resist. Endure what must be endured. Survival depended on composure. Valeria had sought clearer answers elsewhere. She had spoken with her Aunt Cornelia, a widow who had chosen not to remarry. Cornelia spoke plainly, without metaphor. Under Roman law, she explained, a wife's body belonged to her husband. Consent within marriage did not exist as a concept. Resistance was not only meaningless, it was dangerous. A wife who resisted could be punished without consequence. Cornelia also offered something more valuable than fear: strategy. She explained how women survived within marriage, how to avoid provoking anger, how to make oneself useful, respected, necessary. This knowledge was never written down. It was passed quietly, urgently, from one woman to another, generation after generation. Roman marriage was not a partnership. It was a transfer of ownership. In Roman society, a daughter lived under patria potestas, the absolute authority of her father. Marriage did not free her from this system. It merely transferred that authority to another man. The ceremonies that appeared festive were legal mechanisms, designed to formalize this exchange in the eyes of the state, the family, and the gods. The wedding night was when that authority became physical reality. Roman legal texts are unambiguous. A husband had unrestricted sexual access to his wife. What modern readers might recognize as violation was understood in Rome as marital right. This was not hidden from women. It was simply not discussed openly. Silence did not indicate ignorance. It indicated trauma. At sunset, Valeria was taken from her father's house in a torchlit procession. Music filled the street. Guests laughed. Traditional jokes were shouted, often crude, often explicit. Roman culture believed humor softened what everyone understood was coming. Public laughter masked private fear. She did not walk into her husband's home. She was lifted and carried over the threshold, reenacting a ritual rooted in Rome's founding myths, particularly the abduction of the Sabine women. The symbolism was unmistakable. Marriage began with taking. Inside, Valeria was offered fire and water, symbols of her new domestic role. She was introduced to the household gods, the servants she would oversee, the walls that would now contain her life. She spoke the ancient words that erased her former self and bound her identity to her husband's. From this moment forward, her name mattered less than his. Then the guests departed. The marriage bed stood prepared, decorated with garlands and perfume. A matron waited outside the chamber, not to comfort the bride, but to confirm that the marriage had been completed. The presence of that witness alone reveals how often fear, injury, or resistance disrupted what was expected. What happened behind closed doors varied widely. Some husbands were restrained. Some were indifferent. Some were cruel. But the underlying reality was constant. A woman with no legal agency was expected to submit. Pain was common. Fear was universal. Refusal was impossible. Details are unnecessary. The experience marked the irreversible end of bodily autonomy. By morning, Valeria had survived. Survival, however, did not mean safety. What happened once would happen again whenever her husband chose. Roman wives learned quickly that endurance alone was not enough. Survival required awareness, adaptability, and restraint. Valeria learned her husband's moods. She learned when silence was safest and when obedience should be visible. She managed the household efficiently. She made herself indispensable. These skills did not earn affection, but they earned stability. In Roman marriage, usefulness was protection. This was the education Roman women received after the wedding night. Pregnancy altered everything. It was the greatest danger a Roman woman faced, and also her greatest source of leverage. Childbirth was deadly. Infection, hemorrhage, and complications were common. Many women did not survive their first labor. Yet producing children, especially sons, transformed a wife's position. A woman who bore heirs gained security. She became valuable not only as property, but as legacy. Valeria survived childbirth. She gave her husband a son. Her status changed immediately. She was treated with greater caution. Not out of tenderness, but out of recognition. She now represented continuity. Within Roman marriage, that recognition was power. Years passed. Valeria bore more children. She grew older, steadier. Her influence expanded quietly. Younger brides came to her for advice. Women confided fears they could not voice elsewhere. Roman women survived by forming networks beneath the notice of men, sharing knowledge that preserved one another. Her life remained constrained, but within those constraints she carved out control. She managed finances. She oversaw servants. She shaped her children's futures. This was not freedom, but it was agency of a kind. When her husband died decades later, Valeria experienced something unfamiliar. Autonomy. She did not remarry. Many widows chose not to once they understood what freedom felt like. For the first time since girlhood, her body and decisions belonged to her. Valeria's story was not exceptional. It was ordinary. Millions of Roman women lived and died within the same system. And its legacy did not end with Rome. The legal idea that marriage erased consent survived for centuries. In parts of Europe, marital rape was not legally recognized until the late 20th century. In some places, it was even later. The foundations of those laws were laid in Rome. The Roman wedding night is not distant history. It is a root. Understanding this past matters because systems of control do not disappear on their own. They evolve. They justify themselves through tradition. They hide behind ceremony and silence. Roman women survived by sharing knowledge, supporting one another, and enduring what they were never meant to enjoy. Their silence was not consent. It was survival. And now that history is no longer hidden, what remains, long after the torches have burned out and the stone walls have crumbled, is not the ritual, nor the law, nor the power that enforced it. What remains are the lives lived quietly within those systems, shaped by endurance rather than choice. The Roman wedding night was never about love. It was about control, inheritance, and survival. For the women who lived through it, strength did not look like rebellion. It looked like patience. It looked like memory. It looked like women teaching other women how to endure what could not yet be changed. History often celebrates empires, victories, and laws. It rarely pauses for the silent moments that defined everyday life. But those moments mattered. They shaped generations. They echoed forward in ways we still feel. To remember these stories is not to judge the past by modern standards, nor to sensationalize suffering. It is to recognize how deeply rooted some systems are, and how hard they are to dismantle once they are called tradition. The women of Rome did not leave monuments. They left resilience. And by telling their story, we ensure that what was once endured in silence is finally understood.